A monastery is a building or complex of buildings comprising the domestic quarters and workplaces of monastics, whether monks or nuns, and whether living in communities or alone. The monastery generally includes a place reserved for prayer, which may be a chapel, church or temple, and may also serve as an oratory. Monasteries vary greatly in size, comprising a small dwelling accommodating only a hermit, or in the case of communities anything from a single building housing only one senior and 2 or 3 junior monks or nuns, to vast complexes and estates housing tens or hundreds. A monastery complex typically comprises a number of buildings which include a church, dormitory, cloister, refectory, library, balneary and infirmary. Depending on the location, the monastic order and the occupation of its inhabitants, the complex may also include a wide range of buildings that facilitate self-sufficiency and service to the community. These may include a hospice, a school and a range of agricultural and manufacturing buildings such as a barn, a forge or a brewery. In English usage, the term monastery is generally used to denote the buildings of a community of monks. In modern usage, convent tends to be applied only to institutions of female monastics, particularly communities of teaching or nursing religious sisters. Historically, a convent denoted a house of friars, now more commonly called the friary. Various religions may apply these terms in more specific ways. Etymology. The word monastery comes from the Greek word mu omicron nu alpha sigma tau eta rho iota omicron nu, newt, of mu omicron nu alpha sigma tau eta rho iota omicron sigma monasterios, from mu omicron nu alpha zeta epsilon iota nu mones, in to live alone, from the root mu omicron nu omicron sigma monos, alone. The suffix terion denotes a place for doing something. The earliest extant use of the term monasterian is by the 1st century AD Jewish philosopher Philo in On the Contemplative Life, ch. 3. In England, the word monastery was also applied to the habitation of a bishop and the cathedral clergy who lived apart from the lay community. Most cathedrals were not monasteries, and were served by canons secular, which were communal but not monastic. However, some were run by monasteries orders, such as York Minster. Westminster Abbey was for a short time a cathedral, and was a Benedictine monastery until the Reformation, and its chapter preserves elements of the Benedictine tradition. See the Entry Cathedral. They are also to be distinguished from collegiate churches, such as St. George's Chapel, Windsor. Terms in most of this article. The term monastery is used generically to refer to any of a number of types of religious community in the Roman Catholic religion, and to some extent in certain other branches of Buddhism. There is a somewhat more specific definition of the term and many related terms. Buddhist monasteries are generally called vihara. Viharas may be occupied by males or females, and in keeping with common English usage, a vihara populated by females may often be called a nunnery or a convent. However, vihara can also refer to a temple. In Tibetan Buddhism, monasteries are often called gompa. In Thailand, Laos and Cambodia, a monastery is called the wat. In Burma, a monastery is called a kyorm. A monastery may be an abbey, or a priory, or conceivably a hermitage. It may be a community of men or of women. A charter house is any monastery belonging to the Carthusian order. In Eastern Christianity, a very small monastic community can be called a sketi, and a very large or important monastery can be given the dignity of a lavra. The great communal life of a Christian monastery is called cenobitic, as opposed to the anchoretic life of an anchorite and the eremitic life of a hermit. There has also been, mostly under the Osmanli occupation of Greece and Cyprus, an idiorhythmic lifestyle where monks come together but being able to own things individually and not being obliged to work for the common good. In Hinduism, monasteries are called matha, mandir, koil, or most commonly an ashram. Jains use the Buddhist term vihara. Monastic life. In most religions, the life inside monasteries is governed by community rules that stipulate the gender of the inhabitants and require them to remain celibate and own little or no personal property. The degree to which life inside a particular monastery is socially separate from the surrounding populace can also vary widely. Some religious traditions mandate isolation for purposes of contemplation removed from the everyday world, in which case members of the monastic community may spend most of their time isolated even from each other. Others focus on interacting with the local communities to provide services, such as teaching, medical care, or evangelism. Some monastic communities are only occupied seasonally, depending both on the traditions involved and the local weather, and people may be part of a monastic community for periods ranging from a few days at a time to almost an entire lifetime. The life within the walls of a monastery may be supported in several ways: by manufacturing and selling goods, often agricultural products, by donations or alms, by rental or investment incomes, and by funds from other organizations within the religion, which in the past formed the traditional support of monasteries. There has been a long tradition of Christian monasteries providing hospitable, charitable and hospital services. Monasteries have often been associated with the provision of education and the encouragement of scholarship and research, which has led to the establishment of schools and colleges and the association with universities. Christian monastic life has adapted to modern society by offering computer services, accounting services and management, as well as modern hospital and educational administration. Buddhist monasteries, known as vihara, emerged sometime around the 4th century BC, from the practice of vassa, the retreat undertaken by Buddhist monks and nuns during the South Asian rainy season, to prevent wandering monks from disturbing new plant growth or becoming stranded in inclement weather. Buddhist monks and nuns were instructed to remain in a fixed location for the roughly 3-month period, typically beginning in mid-July. Outside of the Vassa period, monks and nuns both lived a migratory existence, wandering from town to town begging for food. These early fixed Vassa retreats were held in pavilions and parks that had been donated to the Sangha by wealthy supporters. Over the years, the custom of staying on property held in common by the Sangha as a whole during the Vassa retreat evolved into a more cenobitic lifestyle, in which monks and nuns resided year-round in monasteries. In India, Buddhist monasteries gradually developed into centers of learning where philosophical principles were developed and debated. This tradition is currently preserved by monastic universities of Vajrayana Buddhists, as well as religious schools and universities founded by religious orders across the Buddhist world. In modern times, living a settled life in a monastery setting has become the most common lifestyle for Buddhist monks and nuns across the globe, whereas early monasteries are considered to have been held in common by the entire Sangha. In later years, this tradition diverged in a number of countries. Despite Vinaya prohibitions on possessing wealth, many monasteries became large landowners, much like monasteries in medieval Christian Europe. In China, peasant families worked monastic-owned land in exchange for paying a portion of their yearly crop to the resident monks in the monastery, just as they would to a feudal landlord. In Sri Lanka and Tibet, the ownership of a monastery often became vested in a single monk, who would often keep the property within the family by passing it on to a nephew who ordained as a monk. In Japan, where civil authorities permitted Buddhist monks to marry, being the head of a temple or monastery sometimes became a hereditary position, passed from father to son over many generations. Forest monasteries, most commonly found in the Theravada traditions of Southeast Asia and Sri Lanka, are monasteries dedicated primarily to the study of Buddhist meditation, rather than scholarship or ceremonial duties. Forest monasteries often function like early Christian monasteries, with small groups of monks living an essentially hermit-like life gathered loosely around a respected elder teacher. While the wandering lifestyle practiced by the Buddha and his disciples continues to be the ideal model for forest tradition monks in Thailand and elsewhere, practical concerns including shrinking wilderness areas, lack of access to lay supporters, dangerous wildlife, and dangerous border conflict dictate that more and more meditation monks live in monasteries, rather than wandering. Tibetan Buddhist monasteries are sometimes known as lamaseries and the monks are sometimes known as lamas. H.P. Blavatsky's Theosophical Society named its initial New York City meeting place the Lamasery. Some famous Buddhist monasteries include Donglen Temple, Jiangxi, China; Jetavana, Sravasti, Nalanda, India; Shaolin, China; Tengbosch, Nepal. A further list of Buddhist monasteries is available at the list of Buddhist temples. Trends in Buddhist monasticism. Some of the largest monasteries in the world are Buddhist. Drepung Monastery in Tibet housed around 10,000 monks prior to the Chinese invasion. Today, its relocated monastery in India houses around 8,000.